Hello, this is Michael Rubin, and we've been talking about uh, modes like the Mixolydian mode, which had a flat 7, and then the Dorian mode, which had a flat third and a flat 7, and how each one is getting progressively bluesier. And I think we've made it far enough to get into the blues scale. So this is like the holy grail of harmonica. Um, I'm going to give you the C blues scale, and we're going to try and figure out the scale degrees from it. So the notes are C, E flat, F, G flat, G, B flat, and then it returns to C. So let's say we didn't want to play it in the key of C, but we wanted to play it in the key of G. We have to think about the scale degrees. So for example, in the key of C, C is the first note and D is the second note. We have to come up with numbers that explain this scale. And all numbers relate to the major scale. So the C major scale is C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. So C is the first note in the C major scale. So the first note in a blues scale is a 1. But the next note in the blues scale is E flat. There's no E flat in the C major scale. How are we going to explain this numerically? There is a D and there is an E. The D is the 2. Maybe we could call this a sharp 2 because it's a half step higher than a 2. But I think it's more appropriate to call it a flat 3 because the third note in the key of C major is E. And this note that I said to you, we call it an E flat. I could have called it a D sharp, but traditionally it's called an E flat. So it's a flat third, like we have in the Dorian scale. So this is really strange. We go straight from the 1 to the flat 3. Where's the 2? Isn't E flat the second note in the C major in the C blues scale? Shouldn't it be some type of 2? But the notes in the blues scale, or any scale that you're dealing with, are not numbered based on their placement in the scale that you're dealing with. All numbers, and this is very important, all numbers relate to the major scale that has the same root as the scale that you're dealing with. So is there a D in the blues scale? There's no type of D. There's no D flat. There's no D sharp. Therefore, there is no type of 2 in the blues scale. It goes directly from the 1 to the flat 3. That is weird. We've never seen anything like that before. The next note is an F. There is an F in the C major scale. C, D, E, F. It's the fourth note. So it goes 1, flat 3, 4 so far. The next note is G flat. Is there a G flat in the C major scale? No. But there is a G. What number is G in C major? C, D, E, F, G. It's the fifth note. So G flat is a flat 5. We haven't seen a flat 5 before. This is a very bluesy note. But then, in the blues scale, we have a G. And G is the fifth note in the key of C. So in the blues scale, not only do we have a flat 5, but we also have a 5. So there are 2 different kinds of 5s in the same scale. 2 different kinds of Gs. A G flat and a G. This is weird. We have not seen anything like this before. So far, all of our scales have been alphabetical. But even if we had called this G flat F sharp, it would not have been alphabetical because the previous note was F. So it would have gone F, F sharp. 2 Fs in a row. So either way you look at this, it's either 2 Fs in a row or 2 Gs in a row. The blues scale is not alphabetical. This is big, big stuff. It is a weird scale. After the G, it goes to B flat. There is no B flat in the C major scale. There is an A. and there is a B. Since B flat uses the letter B, we're going to compare it to the letter B in the C major scale. B is the 7th note in the C major scale. B flat is 1/2 step lower or flatter than B, so we call it the flat 7th. And we've seen the flat 7th before in the Dorian scale. But again, we skipped a note. We went from G, and we skipped over it. Somebody's calling me. Hold on a second. We skipped a note. We went straight from G to B flat. So there is no A in the C blues scale. There's no A flat, there's no A, there's no A sharp. So it went directly from a 5th note in the scale, the G note, skipped over the A note, the 6th note, to the B flat, the flat 7th. So just like there is no D or no 2, there is also no 6. So this is a very weird scale. 1, flat 3, 4, flat 5, 5, flat 7, root. We have not seen anything like this before. Why is this scale so weird? Well, in order to understand this scale, we have to understand the history of the blues scale. In the late 1800s, Yale University hired a bunch of scientists and mathematicians to create a new form of music. They came up with this numbers pattern, and they hired a guy named Charlie Patton. Now, Charlie Patton was the guitarist who was like the most famous before Robert Johnson, and he had already gotten some fame. But they gave him this numbers pattern, and they said, we want you to create a new style of music. And they wound up calling it the blues. So that's why this is such an unusual scale, is because it wasn't developed by musicians, it was developed by scientists and mathematicians. Okay, so hopefully you can tell by now that I'm kidding. What happened was musicians made sounds. Blues musicians made sounds that they liked. And they did not care about music theory and whether or not there was a 2 or just 1 5 or a 6. They didn't care at all about that. What they cared about was making good music. And they played these notes. And the music theory people listened to the blues and said, what's going on with the blues? And they figured out that these were the notes that were being played, and they came up with this numbers pattern. And that's how it happened. So why is it such a weird scale? Because we don't create scales based on how mathematically perfect they are. We create scales based on what makes good sounding music. Now, there's a few things I want you to think about with the blues scale. If here is a C and here is an E flat, it goes directly from to, and it doesn't hit the D in between. It doesn't go. Now the D is the 2nd note in the C major scale, and you can hit a 2nd note no matter what key you're in. If you're playing blues and you hit a 2 in the key of C, the note D, in the key of G, the note A, that's fine. The Dorian scale is a very bluesy scale, and it has a 2 in it. In general, if you stick to the blues scale, you sound very traditional, almost down in the Delta style blues. If you bring in 2s and 6s, it sounds a little jazzier. So for example, Muddy Waters might play using the blues scale, but T-Bone Walker might use the Dorian scale. Or Sonny Boy Williamson, Rice Miller would use the blues scale, and Little Walter might use the Dorian scale. It just adds a little jazzy flavor. There's nothing wrong with the 2. But I think the reason why they leave out the 2, it's kind of a nice reminder. People tend to be very linear. If you give them a scale that goes 1, 2, flat 3, when they play, they're going to hit that. Or back down. But if you give them a scale that goes directly from the 1 to the flat 3, they're going to hit that. My point is, a lot of people play what's handed to them in a linear fashion. Because the blues scale is missing the 2, it really suggests to the musicians, why don't you try skipping the 2? Why don't you try going directly from the 1 to the flat 3? And that interval, the movement between those 2 notes, is a bluesy interval. So it really creates a bluesy feeling that a lot of people would never discover if they had to figure it out for themselves in the Dorian scale. When you're playing Dorian, you have the notes 1, 2, flat 3, C, D, E flat. You don't have to play the D note. You could go from C to E flat, 1 to flat 3. That's still playing using the Dorian scale. There's no requirement when you use the Dorian scale to play every note in a linear fashion. But most people, when they see the straight line, walk it. So the blues suggest, why don't you try 1 to flat 3 and don't play a 2? Same thing with the 5 to the flat 7. It suggests skip the 6. There's nothing wrong with the 6. It sounds fine in blues. But it's really cool to go straight from the 5 to the flat 7. Now the other thing I want you to notice is how many notes are there from C to E flat. If C is the 0 point, C sharp is 1, D is 2, E flat is 3. It's 3 notes apart. How far is it from the 5th note, G, to B flat? G goes up to A sharp, or G sharp, 1, to A, 2, to B flat, 3. It's 3 notes apart. It's the same distance. Now once I'm on E flat, the next note is F. How far is it from E flat to F? It goes up to E, 1, F, 2. It's 2 notes higher. Then, if I'm on B flat, how far is it to C, the next note? It goes up to B1, C2. So the distance from the first note to the flat third to the 4th note is the first note up 3 half steps, up 2 half steps. The distance from the 5th note to the flat 7 back to the root is the 5th note, up 3 half steps, up 2 half steps. It's the same distance. Listen, C, E flat, F, G, B flat, C. Can you hear how there's kind of a symmetry? This is something I want you to start thinking about, is that in music, scales tend to be symmetrical. Not all the time, but quite often. And the first note in the scale and the 5th note in the scale act in very similar ways. They do similar things. They have the same type of functions. The 2nd note and the 6th note often act in similar ways. The 3rd note and the 7th note. And the 4th note and back to the root. So, if you create a lick, let's say, I'm looking for a C harp, but I'm not finding it. Okay, this is a D harp. Let's say I go flat 3, 1. Well, a 3 and a 7 are similar, and a 1 and a 5 are similar. So if I go flat 7, 5, then I have a similar lick. So if I go can you see how there's a similarity between those licks? They have similar functions. So that's what I want you to start thinking about, is if you find a lick down low in the scale, can you create a similar lick up high by using symmetrical ideas. Okay, next time we're going to do the first position blues scale. See you soon.